I don't know where the training platform is going, whether that's online or remaining in person, right? For online coaches, it's a very successful time right now because we're so connected
Yeah.
in with technology and with social media. Social media's been blowing things up. It's a good way to promote your online business, which I do. I use that, but also my in-person, people that I see that want to come in the gym, just as many people are interested. So like I think it could go either way. Like eventually maybe we end up it's all online, all virtual kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, I think people like having that hands-on kind of aspect to it, which I understand. I know. And sometimes when I'm working out by myself, I catch myself kind of shortchanging my sets and whatnot if I'm like half-heartedly doing it, not paying attention, and having that person there over my shoulder.
Yeah.
Some people like that and need that, and I get it. So I don't know where the world's going to end up.
I actually don't know either, but I would say, in my own perception, I think there are two things that would make me suggest that there's at least a good chance that it actually stays online. So I do agree that people are kind of craving getting back in person right now, but I think that has a lot to do with just being cooped up and not being able to go to the gym, having to feel restricted even when you do go to the gym right now. So a lot of places will you still have to wear the mask and things like that. A lot of places, I don't know, like whenever I don't know if TCU would still do it, but to go to the rec, you have to sign up, right? So there are things that are restricting you from just that open access gym. And I think people in general are hungry for it. I wonder if it's just like this peak, and then all of a sudden online is going to continue to or doing things remotely is going to continue to get easier. And so then they're going to want to go back into or continuing on with remote, because maybe they're going to start working more remote, or maybe their business is going to have a bigger transition to remote, whatever it might be. But then there's also the coach perspective is when you can do things from our online, that opens you up to be able to do or several other things as far as sources of revenue and avenues in which you can promote yourself, your business, your brand. You can train a little bit, or you can train yourself a little bit better, I would imagine, because you do have more time that's not dedicated somewhere physically. And I think that both of those things may conflict with each other at some point and start to transition things into online. But I don't know, right? I think that humanity has proved me wrong before as far as what you think will or will not happen.
Right.
And so I do think that those things are going to contribute just in general to it going to a more remote setting. But it wouldn't surprise me if people were like, nope, we're going back in person, just like you have with football games and concerts and everything else that you're going to see or that you're seeing going on right now. So I'm hopeful that we do stay in person, because I would agree, like myself personally, I would like to have a partner. The partner is always a better way to go, whether it's a partner or it's a coach that you're paying for, somebody there to keep you in check for the most part.
Right.
I do enjoy it personally.
I would be interested to see where it goes. See if people are like, "Yep, it's time to get back into person. This is where we're going to stay," or if the ease of access on online takes back over again.
Everything that I do with, or all of the different technologies that I kind of work with is all based on doing things remotely. I also wonder if all of our technology improvements for exercise and doing them at home are going to improve. Like you have, what is it? Obviously you have Peloton. You have the Tonal.
Yeah.
Those. Have you ever used the Tonal?
I have not, but those systems are coming out of the woodworks.
You have, what is it? The, I believe it's a Lulu mirror.
Yep.
Where it has a virtual mirror that you can work out in with
everybody's getting their hand in the dish there. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's only going to get easier.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. We're at the ground floor of what you can do exercise wise at home. And Peloton already does it really well. But obviously it's secluded to people who are going to do things like cycling and aerobic training and stuff like that. So you've kind of cornered that part, but there's a huge area for actual resistance training to get done at home. And I think Tonal is trying to do that. I don't know how well it's going to work out.
I have not. I don't know anybody personally that uses one.
Expensive for most people right now.
Right. Maybe once we get past the point where it's more affordable for everyday average person, I would like to see how successful it might become. But
How about this? I think you probably have people or people doing tonal less as far as putting it in their home, because most people that are going to try to do the home workouts are likely not bodybuilders and are more likely people who need to just lose weight in general.
mhm.
And so they're probably more likely to do something like buy the Peloton with the money that they do have because they feel like they need to lose weight. Whereas people who actually have a certain degree of musculature already would probably prefer much more to go to a gym and lift weights in that way rather than doing it from home on the resistance band type of thing. So I
Right.
think it depends on the type of person that you have that's going to need to do a certain type. Not that I would say that people who need to lose weight shouldn't do resistance training, of course. But that's probably the actual perception, is that I don't need to be doing this. I need to be doing cardio. Right. And so then they'll do it, they'll get the cardio machine, whereas the people who want to lift will just go lift.
Right. It's just
Right.
come down to what people
Mhm.
feel like their goal is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So then how about this? Let's get on topic then. So what are we actually talking about today?
Topic of today is our diurnal or circadian patterns, rhythms of exercise, life, and how much you should pay attention to these for your training, for your overall health, whether your circadian rhythm affects your training and how you perform in the gym. Circadian timings in general. We'll keep it pretty broad today because I do have some people I eventually want to bring on who know
Mhm.
more about this than I do. And I just got done writing about this for the past 2 years. So if it says anything about how much they know, they're very knowledgeable on the subjects. So I'd love to have some of them on here in the future. So I'll keep broad stroke brush today to introduce topics and things like that. But yeah, so that's what we're going to be shooting for today. How much do you know, Austin, about circadian rhythms and exercise performance, first off?
So as far as circadian rhythm and exercise performance goes, I guess it would depend on the question, so to speak.
Right.
Right. So what is it, or I guess what is it we're talking about, and how does, there are a lot of factors that will play into how you're going to perform with exercise, and that a lot of things that are going on at certain parts or times of the day based on your circadian patterns can influence your exercise. So let's say certain things are happening physiologically in the morning, certain things are happening physiologically in the evening, and some of those can be really positive, and then some of those are more negative, so to speak. So let's say like later in the evening, you would have a greater lipid concentration, let's say, which can be bad depending on like what your nutritional strategy is for things like intermittent fasting, let's say. But then earlier in the day, you would have more insulin, right? I believe you'd have a greater insulin response, closer to, I don't know if it's right upon or immediately upon waking. I don't think so. I think it's like 2 hours after waking or so. Don't quote me on that. But in that instance, it'd be better to, right, probably eat a little or eat more in the morning, right, whenever insulin's going to be at its peak, or you'd want to do something or exercise a little bit after that, right? Because insulin increased, you can probably shuttle more glycogen into the muscle, right? And then you'd have a better exercise. Now, I may be totally wrong on that. That's just kind of what I'm thinking about, like as I'm thinking about what happens from when you wake up to when you go to bed.
Yeah. So taking the approach there from your insulin response throughout the day is something that I haven't put a lot of thought into.
Yeah.
Most of what I looked into, and for like what I just did for my thesis, which we actually submitted for publication today.
Congratulations and good luck, man.
Well, thanks. We'll see how much the reviewers love it. So what I've been looking at there is basically our circadian patterns of our circadian rhythms of muscular and neuromuscular performance. Basically, so how much like force can we produce at different times of day? How active are our muscles? So how is our muscle activation? How is that changing at different times of day? So basically taking a look at overall performance, dichotomous here, morning and evening, and seeing how we respond to basic single joint movements, and then comparing those two different time points, as well as we also did some really cool work comparing males and females, and then upper versus lower limbs to see if these different muscle groups responded differently in their diurnal performance or diurnal preferences. So that's kind of the direction I've taken my research, and I really have enjoyed that. I would like to eventually do some other stuff as well. But basically what we found and what pretty much lines up, we did some really novel stuff that hadn't really been done before, which is cool. But the basics of what we found aligned a lot with previous literature, with saying that overall, for the most part, we perform better in the evening than we do in the morning. This has been shown 1,000 times in so many different movements, different events. So like anything from a bicep curl or a squat to sprint performance or swimming. Overall athletic performance is generally peaking in the evening. And that comes down to a number of physiological factors. We can contribute these to a lot of different stuff, and there's a lot of different debate on what's the primary driving factor here. But a big one that I've found is body temperature. So we wake up, our body temperature is naturally cooler or lower in the morning upon waking than it is in the evening, right? As the day goes on, through ambulation and moving around, our body temperature elevates. And during these elevated these elevated temperatures, we have enhanced, contractile properties of the muscle, and enhanced calcium kinetics and whatnot. And so our ability to perform and contract our muscles is improved in the evening. Overall, right? This is not for every person all the time. We have some individuals who perform better in the morning, like that I saw in my study. And this is an interesting one, because when we see people that respond better in the morning, you might come into question of, well, why? If we know that overall most people perform better in the evening, why are these people consistently performing better in the morning? So like there has been shown that some people consistently perform better in the morning.
Yeah.
This brings into question their training preference or exercise time performance preference and their diurnal chronotype. So diurnal chronotype is basically comes down to like if you're a morning person or evening person. Very basic definition there. If you're a night owl or a morning lark is the terms that they use. Some people are more inclined to be active and move around in the morning. Some people are more active and inclined to perform better in the evening, not just physically, but also neurologically. Like they're mentally more focused and whatnot in the morning than they are in the evening. And this then comes down to, well, what is causing this person to be more prone to being better in the morning or in the evening? And this is where we get into some stuff that's a little bit over my head, but it's really cool, and I want to eventually discuss it with some people that I bring on. So their genetic or circadian clock, there's a clock gene that we all have that modulates our diurnal chronotype. And this clock gene is obviously the genetic component, comes down. It can be altered, but for the most part, you're pretty much genetically predetermined on if you're a morning person or evening person. Training at specific times of day can adjust your circadian rhythm. And so you can overcome this genetic component a little bit, but at the end of the day, right, it's coded into your DNA that you are a morning person or an evening person, which is really cool. But through training and things like that, our primary circadian clock in our brain is located in our suprachiasmatic nucleus, deep in the middle of the brain. And that's like our primary clock that drives all the other cells in our body. Every one of our cells has a circadian clock, our circadian rhythm, but the one located in the brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is the one that delivers the message to all the rest of the body. And it's affected by ocular absorption of light and things like that. So yeah, a lot of talk in there, but
no, you're good. You're good. I'm kind of soaking it all in. I'm thinking, I'm going back to my own insulin comment, and I'm like, okay, I don't think that's correct. I think it depends on when you eat your first meal.
Probably
that would
so.
happen. So that wouldn't have anything to do, I don't think, with the circadian rhythm. But back to what you were just saying with that you have this circadian gene, let's say, right, or this clock gene that exists, and then you have a place in the brain that actually kind of regulates everything, and that obviously you're predisposed to being either a morning person or an evening person. Do you know by chance, I mean, what do you know or see as far as distributions between people who are night and morning people? Because I'm thinking about different things like how we got to this point and how our bodies adapted, right? Because eventually we were on Earth, right? And our body had to adapt to physiology or had to adapt to the sun going up, sun going down, right, in some way. And so I'm thinking about why you would perform better, right? Why you'd be stronger, why you would have all these different things going on. There are a lot of reasons, like you said, you can have increased body temperature, probably have increased blood pressure a little bit later in the day than you would have it in the morning, right? And so those things can help you with performance. But I wonder if you've adapted over time that way for things like maybe hunting at some point in human history, right? Whenever our animals would be either out or would be more out, right? And more closer to the evening hours as they were either hunting or as you were not as visible to other animals that would also eat you, right? I don't know exactly what it was, but I would imagine that you being a human being a predator, right? You would have those natural kind of predator, or that natural predator clock, which is where you would either get hungrier in the evening or which may be based on your circadian pattern as well, right? Whether or not you get hungry in the morning or in the evening, but also be based on when you would have to hunt for your food, let's say,
right.
At some point. Now, I don't know. I consider myself a caveman predator. My hunger spikes in the evening, and so I'm ready to eat after about 7 p.m. But I don't know if there's any evolution involved with that, or if there's any like data to suggest that majority of people either one or the other, morning or night.
Right. So it's overall, it's I don't know the exact data on it, but from what I've seen in the literature, it seems to be pretty even for the most part. I think when you're taking these chronotype questionnaires, a lot of people fall into there's like subcategories too of some people that are pure, like very early morning, mid morning, late morning, early evening. There's like 5 different categories, right? A lot of people tend to shift into the morning category, even though overall we perform better in the evening, right? So a lot of people will classify themselves on their chronotype as a morning person, but when they get tested on their performance, a lot of times they're still performing better in the evening. And that goes down to a lot of the physiological responses that we have. Now, going back to the adaptive process of how this came to be, it makes sense, right? As you know, humans first crawling out of the caves, human beings are notoriously behind the curve in the animal kingdom when it comes to when it comes to our senses, right? Our sight, our smell, our sound. We notoriously are garbage compared to creatures that are much bigger and larger and faster and stronger than us, also having all these great senses, right? So when are those big creatures out and most active? At night, generally, right? Majority. We'll look at lions, for example. They're at the end of the day, they do most of their hunting at night. Same with other big cats and things like that, because they're very adapted to doing so and they're very successful at it. Human beings don't want to be out at that time, right? Because we need light to see and do things. When it's pitch black outside, we have big brain or not, we have no chance, right?
Yeah. See, it would almost, to me, it might not be an evolutionary, like a hunting tactic at that point to me then. just for the sense of, okay, or why would it be that way? If I needed to have the light, why would I perform better? So I think humans also hunt their prey differently than all other animals, because or other animals don't have the endurance that we do, right? And so human beings have some of the best endurance, right, in the world. And so that would be how you would catch your prey, or I think that, yeah, human beings have the best endurance of any mammal. And so you can, maybe except for a horse. I don't know those.
Well,
I think they're better than a horse.
humans are impressive on the endurance aspect. We get 1 point there, right?
Yes. So, but anyways, right. So that would be how you would have to hunt your prey, as you just chase down your prey until eventually it can't go anymore and it dies, right? Or it falls down from exhaustion and then you kill it. So if you would need to perform, I guess all I'm considering is you would need to perform at your highest level to be able to do so. And that may be just, maybe I'm probably overthinking this, right? Where you wouldn't need to perform that well. Maybe you've already adapted, like, let's say back in the day, you probably weren't a harvester at that point, right? If you're talking about just cavemen's hunting like real animals. And so you may have adapted to some level of ketosis where you could, where like ultra marathoners will do really well on a ketogenic diet because they never reached or above a high intensity threshold. So maybe they were just so adapted that they can just get up and start running, and then they don't stop running until they catch their prey, type of thing. And it didn't really matter whether or not they had maximal performance output, if that makes sense. And plus, if we're talking about muscular output, you'd have to be above your low intensity threshold. There's a bunch of things that I'm just throwing around, basically thinking out loud. So you have to forgive me. It's an interesting topic I'm trying to work through.
Yeah.
As you speak about it. But I guess, how about this? So I agree with that you said that there are subcategories, right? You said that that's in the literature. You can't classify somebody dichotomously as either day or night, because I think it really depends on what somebody kind of considers day or night, right? Or what their morning is, right? So I'm a mid-morning person, I'm a morning person, right? There, it varies on whenever you're going to be at your best, let's say, or what you prefer to be at. You also say that the peak strength, peak performance output happens in the evening. Would you say that that's the same for cognitive, or would you say that cognitive would be earlier? Would you do better cognitively earlier?
For the most part, the cognitive portion, from what I've seen, is fairly variable.
Sure.
Right. It depends a lot on what you've conditioned yourself to. Again, it also depends on your genetics, on your circadian clock gene, kind of what you're more predisposed to. But like I said, you can overcome this for physical performance and neurological performance on mentally through conditioning, right? So if I'm a morning person and I perform better in the morning, but I compete in the evening, whether it's something, a physical event or a test, like a mental test, whatever it is, I want to get better at performing in the evening, even though I'm a morning person and I perform better in the morning. You can train. So by then training or doing work, whatever it is you're competing in, whatever it is you're working on, by training or doing work in the evening, you can now begin to equate your morning and evening performance.
Yeah.
Right. So just by conditioning yourself to working, then you can begin to equate those and bring your evening performance up, or vice versa, whatever it is. Right. And they've seen this work and be very beneficial in athletes who compete at generally specific times of day. Right. So if they're specifically competing in the evenings, it makes sense. This is called temporal specificity, right? So specifically training at a specific time of day in order to perform best at that time of day. They've seen athletic improvements by training in the evening when they're competing in the evening, right? So in order to get every ounce out of your training and to do the absolute best, if you know you have a consistent competition schedule, right? If I'm probably always going to be competing in the morning, right? Then train in the morning. You'll get better at training in the morning at competing in the morning by training in the morning, or vice versa, right? And so they've also used this. This is also really cool. with athletes who are traveling around different time zones to compete. So with athletes who are like either, you can look at like MLB, Major League Baseball players, right? Sometimes they're going across 3 different time zones in a weekend to compete, right? So sometimes they'll start modulating their training. They're like, whatever it is, batting practice or weights or things like that, to be of a more specific time of the day to match whatever the time will be whenever they get to their destination. The big example of this as well is the Olympics. So this is why they have to get there super early. Athletes get to the location super early and start practicing at the location that they are competing in, so they can get used to training at that time and get past a lot of other things like jet lag and things like that. But yeah, so the whole training temporal specificity thing is another cool aspect of it that I really like.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, or makes a lot of sense to me. And I, again, would suggest the same thing, that if you need to do something at a certain time of day, they do that for things like the Super Bowl, let's say, right? Or if they're going to play in the Super Bowl, they're going to practice really late for those 2 weeks because they know that they're going to start at, 5, they're going to have that extended break. And so they're going to have these long drawn out practice sessions to help them kind of get prepared for having the longer drawn out games because of the halftime shows, commercials, and all those things like that. Now, that leads me to my next question for you is, we talk about it, upon or at like waking and sleeping and things of that nature. It would make more sense to me that it was less, and like I said, this is just what would make sense to me, which doesn't hold a lot of merit. But it would make more sense to me that it was associated with the time that you see the sun versus the time that you stop seeing the sun. And so I think I've talked to you about it before. I think I asked you either in your thesis defense or something where time changes matter. So like when you do a study and you're doing it whenever a time change is going to occur, and you're looking at it with circadian patterns, right? Is that something that you would need to account for? Because I think different things happen. So immediately what comes to my mind, what happens as soon as sun goes down, is that you start secreting the melatonin, right? And so then sleepiness starts to occur, the things that shut your eyes, right? Stops or prevents, high level muscular contractions, which I don't know if that's true or not, but I think so. As far as or limiting it, let's say the conduction velocity, let's say it's going to help you produce a muscular contraction. Anyway, so like, I guess maybe you can do it better than me, speak more to like how much the sun being up and down matters.
Yes. So we are very ocular human beings, right?
Yeah.
And we are very driven by the rising and falling of the sun. And that comes back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, which receives these solar inputs, right? And then we'll be modulating our circadian pattern accordingly. This is why seeing in daylight early in the morning upon waking is super important for establishing a circadian rhythm, which then will help you be more the more consistent that you can be, the better you will be at being able to modulate performance, right? So if we're establishing a clear circadian rhythm, our brains and our bodies like that. It likes consistency, right? When you wake up late or stay up late looking at watching TV, and so you're getting this late at night ocular input, the solar or light input, right?
Yeah.
That's stimulating that SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
Yeah.
And it's preventing the pineal gland from secreting melatonin. Yeah. Thus affecting your sleep, right? And so then you're going to feel like garbage. And it goes the same the other way in the morning. Not getting that sunlight in the morning will then exacerbate the release of melatonin from and again, you're going to feel like garbage.
Right. So you would say that it doesn't necessarily matter between artificial light and then actual sunlight?
It does. The lux, right? Which is what the measure of light does matter. So if you, I think there's even apps on your phone that you can do to measure this. If you were to close the blinds, turn off, or make sure there's no sunlight at all coming in, room with no windows, and turn on a lamp or turn on bright fluorescent lights up top.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a lux reading. It might seem super bright in there with these super bright fluorescent lights up top, the ones that kind of like hurt your eyes. You've been there. But if you step outside, the magnitude is so much higher from the sun, even if like visually it doesn't look like it's that much brighter. Even like on a cloudy day, the lux, the lumen, right? It's still going to be higher outside than inside with artificial light. And that's going to be really important. The lumen is going to be super important with modulating our circadian rhythms, because that's what feeds our stimulates the brain, right? The suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain to modulate our circadian rhythms. It does make a difference.
Yeah, I was going to say that makes sense to me. So I was going to say, what about, so for like myself, and I would imagine others, so I wake up usually about 5, right? And then I'm out and it's still dark. Well, by the time that I get to work, right? And so I've been up for a significant amount of time. Is there a strategy that does the artificial light help, or is it more important to just like get yourself outside as soon as the sun comes up, if that makes sense? Because I will say, even today, I got here whenever it was dark, and I didn't really leave my office until about 1 o'clock. And then I came back with more energy than I had after I actually walked outside and got some sunlight.
It's amazing how that works, huh?
Yeah. So as far as like, it would make sense to me what you said, as far as like actual sunlight matter, because I've been in my room, right, with 3 screens, or my office, right, 3 screens, with my lights on. And
plenty of light, right?
Yeah. And so, that actually makes quite a bit of sense. I admittedly learned something new there today. So then, that makes
realistically, I mean, so like the whole like night workers or shift workers is a whole other discussion of like how best to modulate that. And I'm not the best person to talk about that, but from what I've seen, sunlight is better than no light.
Sure.
Something's better than nothing, but as soon as you can realistically get outside and get some actual sunlight, better, right?
Is there a length?
It's hard. So for some people,
is there a length of time that you would have to or go outside? So let's say that I would have to use that strategy, so I get to work before the sun comes up, right? And then I'm kind of stuck in an office, or at least a building with artificial light everywhere, for pretty much most hours of the day at that point. And then by the time I'm walking to the gym, it's already dark again. Sad life. But is there like an amount of time that you would need exposure before you start to see the positive influence of light, right?
Usually, so anything is great, but ideally, over 15 minutes, 30 minutes is phenomenal, right? That's if like you're really struggling, but if you could get in 30 minutes of sunlight, that was amazing. So, you have to make sure that it's actually coming in your eyes, right? Don't stare at the sun. That's bad for you. It's a whole other issue. But the only way our body can perceive light is through our eyes. There's been a bunch of different tests on this. That used to be thought that if you just expose like your skin to sunlight, then that would stimulate our circadian response. It doesn't. Sorry. Sunlight through the eyes for 30 minutes minimal, if you can, is great.
Sure. Yeah, I think even just like in my own anecdotal experience, I would probably say that even today I realized that. So it's kind of interesting how that worked out. Now, I guess with that being said, I would like to know, I guess maybe, or I can tell that you have read quite a bit on this here recently, as you've been doing your thesis and your manuscript and everything like that. So let me ask you this. as far as your study goes and other studies of this nature, what do you consider evening? So when you say you perform better in the morning and evening, it wouldn't be based, I would imagine, on where the sun's at in the sky, right? Because we need an objective measure
Right.
for that, right? So what do you consider evening? And I guess how does that vary across individuals, right? Yeah, maybe explain that to me.
Yeah. So for the most part in the literature, the earliest time points that are included in evening analysis are usually 5 p.m.
Yeah.
5 p.m. is generally like the cutoff of what's been established in every study that I've seen as like being included into the evening. That's early. That's like the early evening, 5 to 7, and then there's 7 to 9 kind of thing. So that's what I did for my study. Was the evening analysis was from anywhere between 5 and 7 p.m. Right. Ideally, if you're doing studies like this, I think having 4 time points is like really cool. Like early morning, like 6 to 8, mid morning, 9 to 11, and then an afternoon time, maybe like 3 to 5, and then like 7 to 9. That would be ideal. Not everybody has time for that, which is why you don't see it a whole lot. That's a lot of time points. So
are there studies that do look at it? So that was going to be my next question is, okay, what do you consider evening? So let's say like there's a lot of research out there that would say that training in the evening is going to be superior to training in the morning, or performance is going to be the highest in the evening compared to the morning. Right. And so if we know that, is there a range of time? And again, this is going to vary significantly, but on average, if you were to put the studies together, let's say, that you're going to see a range of time which you're going to see optimal benefits to where, let's say at what point from when you wake up, do you start to see those benefits occurring? Because I would imagine it isn't just like, okay, 5 p.m., you're now ready to go perform on the dot, right? There's going to be some sort of transition into that phase. And then there's going to be a transition out of that phase. Is there an actual time frame or out there as far as, okay, at let's say 1 p.m., you start to make that transition, you stop making, or you're out of that kind of peak performance phase at 8 p.m. So you need to be working out or exercising within there. Or then does it go back to, okay, you have from the time of peak alertness at like 11 a.m. potentially until 6 p.m. whenever you're at your peak. And then at that point, when the sun starts or it goes on its decline, you start to go on your decline as well.
Right. So this comes down to a lot of that inter-individual variability. When you woke up, when you started your day, when is the middle of like your work day, and when are you going to bed?
Sure.
So it's going to depend. But right. So whenever we wake up, that is our highest point when it comes to our cortisol levels, right? Generally. And we see a decline throughout that as we go into the day with that. So obviously our best performance is going to be after that, right? But we usually see those levels decrease and be pretty close to your daily baseline by around like your whatever your midday is, your lunchtime, right?
Do you think before you go, so if your cortisol is going or down, I would imagine at some point the testosterone level is going to go up, right? Do you know what time or kind of when that would occur relative to when you wake up? So your cortisol is going to go down. I'd imagine that your testosterone goes up. Do they have a pretty good or inverse relationship?
They do have an inverse relationship. It's not perfect, it's not 1-to-1.
There's a curve for
there cortisol, is a curvilinear coming up as we, testosterone's here in the morning, curvilinear as we go throughout the day, peaking more in toward those evening hours, right? So then you have to look and see as we get into those evening hours, that's testosterone's the highest, which that's not a main predictor. That's not necessarily going to be a predictor of exercise performance. It might have some influence, but not a huge predictor of it. But there's also this phenomenon in human beings where we might, there's a theory that says that we might be programmed for what's called biphasic sleep. And we generally undergo monophasic sleep, one big bout of sleep in the night, right?
Yeah.
But what about all these cultures where you see the mid-afternoon or early afternoon post-lunch nap, right?
Yeah.
Siesta, right?
Yeah.
That is actually a physiological response, right? After lunch, what happens?
You get sleepy.
We get sleepy, right? And this has been seen whether an individual actually eats or consumes anything or not, they still get sleepy after like their circadian midday. And that's led some research to believe that maybe people might benefit from biphasic sleep. And so then we have to think about, okay, if that's a thing, our peak performance is obviously going to come after that, right? Because it's not going to occur in this stage where we might be wanting to go to sleep or take a nap,
Right.
So after that, it's just be after that. So by that point, we're mid-afternoon, getting into early evening. And so generally what the literature's found is peak performance for most people can be found anytime between like 5 or 8 p.m. It's going to vary. It's going to vary a lot. And this is for people generally with pretty standard work days, right? Waking up 6 or so, whatever it is, going to bed at 10 o'clock. That's generally what the window that's been seen.
Yeah. And so I would agree. I would think that there's the biphasic sleep thing. And so I would imagine that you'd have to go through a waking response after that, depending on how deep the sleep was itself. And so you kind of have to almost start over, but maybe to a lesser degree, I would imagine. So you could still have the evening performance. It might extend how long you're able to perform into the evening hours at a high level potentially. I wonder how much things like cognitive load or just a general physical load leading up to like the 2 o'clock hour time point would matter with that as well. Just as you've woken up, right? What the energy the brain has had to use leading up to that point, and then you would get fatigued, and then obviously like want to take a nap and something like that. I don't think that matters as much for performance. I think it could be the sleeping patterns itself would matter much more. But I'm trying to where was I going to go with this? I guess then, man, I had it in my head and I totally lost it.
You're good. Yeah. So it's a cool phenomenon, right? To think about how our timing of our day-to-day activities and whatnot, whatever we're doing, can affect how we perform. So
I got it back. So I was going to say, let's say, how much does your eating pattern matter? So with more of the things that I would research is you see a big transition away, like intermittent fasting is one of the things that I'm are relatively interested in, just because it is so popular. And so there's actually been a transition away from doing the extended morning fast. So you would do the 8-hour sleep, right? And then you would do basically like an 8-hour fast. So you would do 8-hour waking fast where let me start that over. So you would basically eat from noon to 8 p.m. and then fast all the way again until noon. That gives you 16 hours of fasting and then 8 hours of feeding, right? But you're actually, once you wake up, let's say you're going to wake up at 8 o'clock, right? So you wake up at 8 o'clock, good, decent time in the morning, the sun's up, things like that. There's actually pretty good research to show that that's not going to be optimal for your body composition. And that you actually do much better if you start eating upon waking, which is kind of totally against what we've been doing for quite a while now. But if you eat upon waking and then just stop eating earlier in the evening, so you would go from, let's say 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or so, right? Or you can extend it longer, however long you need your eating window to be. That's going to be optimal for your body composition. So I would imagine in some capacity, it would improve your performance to some degree if you end up with better body composition in the end, unless you're just able to maintain your fat-free mass. Let's say you're not gaining anything, but you're losing some fat mass. I would imagine that has a lot to do with what you're able to store leading up to the point of exercise, right? And so does it matter in that regard? does your performance improve depending on the fact that you've been able to actually store a significant amount of glycogen, or let's say, leading up to the point of having maximal performance output, right? Whereas in the morning, you don't have as many, or your nutrient status is much worse because you haven't had enough time actually to be able to consume enough food to fuel an adequate performance or training session.
Yeah. So obviously the ability to absorb and retain, our glycogen is going to be crucial to performing well. And if you can allow yourself to enhance your glycogen stores through proper feeding timing before your event, that's ideal. So with people who are competing or working out or whatever it is in the evening, you got a little bit extra time, right? It's a little easier because you can eat throughout the day. And by the time you get to your evening performance, your glycogen levels are probably going to be fine depending on what you've been consuming.
Okay.
But
so I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna test you a little bit, I think now.
Go nuts. I might fail.
Yeah. No, now it's making sense now because I actually don't know the answer. And so I actually do have a desire to learn the answer, not just like, hi, I think I got you, of course. But I'm thinking about the circadian pattern, and I'm not questioning whether or not it's real. I do think that it exists, but it would make more sense to me that your nutrient availability plays a significant role in that. Now, I don't know, I guess, the proportion of how much your nutrient status plays a role in you performing better in the evening, or if it is the other factors that help you play or that are related to the circadian patterns, right? So things like having the increased body temperature and things that you suggested earlier, is it more so factors involved with circadian rhythm, or is it the fact that you had enough time to adequately or wake up and have enough nutrients available to be able to cause a maximal contraction, let's say? And could you test it? And I don't know if you could, because if you were to, like, let's say, do a fasted type of performance or a fasted circadian rhythm and performance training study or something, right? Where basically, like, you wake up fasted and you go exercise, and then you take you do your crossover period, so you do your washout time. Then in another trial, you fast all the way up until 5 p.m. Would your performance still decline, or would your performance still be elevated if you didn't have the nutrients available? Does that make sense?
Right. That's a good question. And I don't know that I've ever seen that done in the literature. And I think that would be a really cool study to do, firch off.
Yeah, I think so too. Just because as I'm thinking, as I was processing through everything you were saying, I was like, wait, okay, so you had time to eat. How much you actually being able to eat actually matter? And obviously depending on your appetite is my thing, right? I don't really get hungry in the morning, right? So I tend to consume a bigger bolus maybe later in the afternoon, more so than I would in the morning.
Right.
I have higher circulation of nutrients at that point, and so I perform better around 5 p.m. myself, right? I don't know if that's because of circadian patterns, or is it because I've actually consumed food up to that point and increased my alertness just because I've now extended past waking to a significant degree. And those two, and it may be a good percentage of both, but that's kind of what I was saying with the study is, if you could look at okay, wake up 3 hours of fasting and then you go exercise, right? Then you go all the way to 5 p.m. fasting or exercise, and then see how you perform. And I don't know if you would be able to perform better, right? I don't know.
Knowing just what I've seen in the literature, I would venture, total theoretical answer here, could be incorrect, because there's no data on this. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I would venture out to say the 5 p.m. faster versus the 8 p.m. fasted individual would have extremely similar physiological results in whatever test we put them through. Simply because
I would actually tend to agree with that. Yes.
Simply because of what I know about how these other factors, how these improve our performance throughout the day. body temperature through ambulation and things like that, your alertness throughout the day, fasted or not, your alertness is still going to increase throughout the day, unless I don't know. There's some other factors going on that could dampen this, but I would venture out to say that they'd be extremely comparable, if not even a greater, still following along with greater performance in the evening with the fasted 5 p.m. individual, just because, this is again totally like theoretical, just based on what I know. But I would love actually to see that done in practice. I think that's really.
So I actually, I would agree with you in the sense of if you were to say, okay, regardless of what you did or what you did yesterday, right? And even if you kept it or the same, what you did the day before you did or before you actually did the intervention, you kept those the same, you controlled what everybody ate and did, whatnot, right? And you had them come in relatively soon. So within like a week of each other, right? You had them do like a day 1 and then a day 7.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a lot of time to change or anything habitual or to change any habits, let's say. I think it would probably come out about the same, right? Because I don't think that there's going to be such a significant drawback of nutrient availability within a single day that you're going to see a negative impact on, or that's going to wash out the effect of having improved training in the evening. Does that make sense? So you don't have enough time to be able to deplete yourself of enough nutrients for it to overcome your ability to perform better in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would imagine that if you were to, and I don't know exactly, you'd have to either do crazy depletion bouts of exercise, like the night before or a couple nights before, right? And then go on a low carbohydrate diet or something like that, right? So you're not replenishing to the point where you had depleted muscle glycogen, depleted energy stores. Then you would go and do it in some level of depleted state, whether that be like extended starvation or high bouts of or high depletion bouts of exercise, then have them do that the next day. I think that would matter more as you progress into the evening. So when you're already low on energy that's available to or have maximal performance, you would probably do better in the morning whenever it was as optimal as it's going to be the entire day in its depleted state. And then, you're going to obviously do worse way later on. Right. The only thing is that you'd have to that would be too tough. It would be I have to think through that study design for a little while. Before I could do that, because you'd also have to make sure you'd almost have to do it on the same day, and it would have to be with like a 1 RM, something that's not going to even really test whether or not your depletion is affecting you that much, right? Because you're really not tapping into the glycolysis. Now you'd be low in energy regardless, but anyways, you'd have to do it in the same day, but have a not great exercise measure, or you'd have to do it one day, go through the same deplete or refuel to a certain degree, or all the way up to what you were before, and then deplete the exact same way again. And there's no way you can do that. And there is, but it'd probably
have to find some very committed test subjects.
You would have to have some committed everybody. I think that would be hard to. Basically, you'd have to have people in a ward, I think, basically or deplete them or measure them, control the exercise to the point where you would get them to deplete, right? Measure how depleted they were, go to sleep, have them not eat anything, wake up and do the exercise, then refuel. So then measure them, then refuel to the point you were before, and then do it all over, right? So you'd have to, or then do it all over again. That would be crazy, but it'd be interesting. I guess I would just assume that acutely, so like a quick 1 day, like you wake up fasted type of thing, wouldn't matter so much. But if over time, energy status would probably matter a little bit, is all I was kind of getting after. A long way to say that I think it matters, but maybe not in like immediate or in any level of immediacy. That's interesting.
Interesting potential study that maybe somebody will have the cojones to pull off one day.
I think that would have to be you, but that one would be easy. That one would be easy to do. What happens whenever you don't do it in a day? Because typically you would just allow them to eat whatever they want.
Right. I don't know. You could
to some degree.
you could make it
Yeah, yeah.
easier on you and just standardize, like, participants were instructed to follow the same dietary protocol or same habitual protocol that they've been following before their
Mhm.
previous before the day before their previous test, kind of thing, and standardize it that way. If you want to make it easier on everybody, but then you just come to the question, well, how standardized was it really?
Yeah.
Is that better
Is
than,
MVC, oh, go
I
ahead.
don't know.
Is MVC the best way to test that?
I
Or
would,
like what are your testing measures?
so I would put them through some sort of 1RM or MVC.
Mhm.
I think doing both would be awesome if you could, but I would probably prefer an MVC, maximal voluntary contraction. And then I want to see, like, their muscle activation as well. So they're getting some sort of load cell on there, and then some EMG data on seeing how their muscles actually respond, how what kind of muscle activation is happening to between those two different conditions. So
And so with MVC, and I know there's only so many ways you can do certain or MVCs, depending on where you're at. Does it matter between, would the performance matter measuring between big muscle groups or multi-joint exercises versus a single joint exercise? I think you had spoken to that as far as single joint, right? Or sorry, you did. I think you did single joint.
we did. So in my study, we did single
Yeah.
joint, looking at comparing upper versus lower limbs.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And what we found was they respond a little differently. The upper versus lower limbs respond a little differently to these different diurnal conditions, right? So our knee extension that we did for our quads, that was our lower body muscle group. And then we did a isometric bicep curl for the upper muscle group. And following along with previous literature, what we found with the knee extension was peak performance for the MVC was in the evening, but the bicep was pretty dang standard across equal across the day in most people.
Oh, that makes me happy. I was going to say, don't tell me that I can't go get a pump before I go out on Friday night.
That was pretty standard morning to evening.
Yeah.
We did not find any significant difference there whatsoever. And I think the mean values were incredibly close across both sexes. So that was cool to see the discrepancies between upper and lower limbs. And we kind of theorized that had something to do with a passive warm-up effect through ambulation.
Sure.
You're walking throughout the day. Are we walking on
Yeah.
our hands? No, we're using our legs to
Right.
walk. Those are getting a passive warm-up effect. Our biceps generally are not. So as you go throughout the day, you're warming up your legs, so they're probably going to perform better in the evening. Your biceps are going to be a little more standardized throughout the day.
Sure, sure. So you wouldn't say that, I guess, or muscle size and kind of the musculature of those movements. So obviously you have many elbow flexors, and you have many or knee extensors, but one is obviously bigger than the other, and so
Right.
have different demands upon it. And so I guess I definitely agree that our ambulation is going to play a key, but would it matter if you had just like immobilized somebody, right, for the day and then, and then done it?
Right. That's really interesting.
I'm a therker. I don't always have the answers.
So I think if you just immobilize somebody throughout the day, and they just got to lay there all day, you had to lay there, then I think maybe you might see a similar response between upper and lower limbs, right? We might see that equivalent morning to evening difference, just like the biceps did. We might see that in the legs because it didn't get that passive warm effect. I don't know. No one's ever tested that. That's really,
I would imagine
really
that it would be a way to wash out the potential, or it would basically be a way to show that ambulation does matter, and that's why you would have the differences in upper lower. It wouldn't necessarily show like or much else other than that. Hey, the better, or the more walking that you're doing, let's say, is going to matter. So if you want to have a good performance, you need to be up. Right. At least having some degree of low intensity movement occurring. right, throughout the day kind of thing. But yeah, that would be an easy one to do, as far as just like have somebody lay in a bed and then kind of lift them up into a leg extension machine, and then do the same thing with the upper body as well.
Right.
I would imagine you wouldn't see anything with your upper body either, right? Or at least no differences. That makes sense.
I wonder if we could convince people to lay in bed all day up until like 5 p.m.
Oh man, I don't know how you would get people to do that.
I don't know.
No.
Maybe I think we'd have to decide. Could we let them watch TV or play some video games or something?
For sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Then you probably could
say,
get some people like, oh yeah, I can sit there and play Call of Duty from all day till 5 p.m. Heck yeah. All right.
No, you can't do that. You can't move the hands. Right. You can't do that. You can't move the hands around too much. Right.
That's true.
So you'd have to just let them watch TV. No. I think it's an interesting question, but then that brings me back to, okay, is it ambulation or is it something going on in the brain that's saying like it's time to activate, right, the muscle and whatnot? So again, it kind of leads me back to the nutrient status question, which again, I would tend to agree that it probably would be about the same, or whether or not you were fasted for 3 hours or you were fasted for 8 hours, right? You probably perform similarly, at least at a single time point. But is it also because you're walking, or is it because you're walking around? So then it's like, okay, is it circadian patterns or is it just normal living? And if you found that peak performance was still better in the evening in the lower limbs, even if you were immobilized, and that would say something, right?
Right.
And then I also wonder how much outside time you would be able to give them. So do they wake up and stay in the lab and not get to go outside? Or that would be or would you have a separate condition where you would like take them in a wheelchair and roll them outside, right? And then have them at least be able to look into the sun or be in the sun for 30 minutes and then go back down and like they're still laying. You didn't have their legs.
So here's a question, I guess, then. Maybe one way you could go about answering that is it their circadian rhythm or is it these other things? Have individuals not get any kind of ocular absorption of light throughout the day.
You could just do legs then too.
Period.
You wouldn't even have to do
just legs.
Yeah, just lower body.
One group you have they get to live life and see things for the day. The other group are blindfolded all day. You get a service dog, you get to walk around all day, and then see if there's any kind of change in performance between morning and evening, and see if there's any inter-individual variability here between these people that did not absorb any light whatsoever throughout the day. They had their eyes shut, they're blindfolded. And these people
but awake.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think that'd be a good way to see. So you could do both, or immobilized versus not immobilized. Then you could do blindfolded versus not blindfolded, and then you could do immobilized and in the sun, and then immobilized no sun. Right. And then you'd be able to look at all those things. Now those are many studies, but it would help you determine whether or not it was the impact of the circadian rhythm itself, or it was just ambulation throughout the day.
Or yes, exactly.
Right. And then I would imagine if you're walking around all day, you would have higher blood pressure. I would imagine, right? I think so. Yes. I think you would have higher blood pressure. Right. Now I'm not a blood pressure guy, but you'd have higher blood pressure from walking around all day, because if you're standing up, or you have to be able to function against gravity, so to speak, rather than if you were going to be laying out or laying down and whatnot. And you also have to be able to move more blood as you're moving. So blood pressure would generally be higher, which is going to impact it as well. So your blood pressure would be lower because of not moving. Blood pressure being higher would also impact exercise. So I think, so as far as performance goes, I would agree that there's probably something going on with day or night. I think you can probably test it to make sure. And then you'd have to figure out, I guess, how about this? Here's maybe a kind of a more final question for you, is what do you do if you find out that it is because of circadian rhythms? Where do you go from there? So
if we find out that it's,
so you did all those tests, and like every single time you came out that seeing the sun, right, and actually getting that rather than moving around, significantly influence whether or not, or your performance, right, in a positive way. So where do you go from there?
I would, as a general, like going through like recommendation wise.
So how about what would be the next study? I guess, so now, so now you know that something is going on, and it's, or how you're or you're not perceiving, but you are getting the ocular signals that are doing something in the brain.
Right.
What do you do from there?
So once I decide that, these solar inputs are what's affecting us and driving our circadian rhythms, then, you might want to look at, okay, well, what about blind people?
Sure.
Do
Well,
they have
never had an
circadian,
amulet.
do
They've
they have
never had.
circadian rhythms? From the research I've just barely looked at, I've heard some other people who know more about this than me mention, yes, they do have circadian rhythms. Are they able to absorb light like we are?
Yeah.
To a degree, yes, right?
Sure.
They to a degree, yes, but so then if they're blind and they aren't able to absorb light to the same degree, how are they able to establish their circadian rhythms, right?
Yeah.
Then we might be able to find, even deeper into the modulatory effect, what is actually driving our circadian rhythms. How much of a role does that light play? Once we know that it is a primary driving factor, whatever. Once we know that, how much of a role does it play? And does being blind or not affect our circadian rhythms, our ability to actually absorb this light? And then you can go into, a bunch of different questions I'd like to ask from there. But
that one's an interesting one, because I almost wonder, I don't know exactly how you perceive light if you're blind. Like if let's say if you can't see, right, are your eyes still able to determine that there's sunlight?
I think it comes down to, don't quote me on this, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it comes down to the actual ocular tissue. If there's like, if the eyeballs are completely removed, if I took out your eyeballs, then I think your ability to absorb light would be zero.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I
Now,
think
if they still, if it's like blindness where they still have
eyes.
actually their eyes are still there, then I think that way from there it's just their absorption of these of light is just diminished to a degree.
Sure. I bet you what you could do then, what I would do if I had the money to do it in that
Remove
case.
people's eyes.
Yeah, I would look at what happens. Okay, so let's say you establish that circadian rhythm is kind of, or as the main thing, is it would almost probably be worth it to do, and it might be something you could even look up, because I would imagine it's out there, is what's going on in the brain or you can do an fMRI. So if you just do functional MRI, you can actually see different metabolism going on in the brain. And you should be able to identify certain markers and what's elevated whenever you are seeing light versus whenever you don't see the light. And that might be something you'd have to do. You could do in-depth brain scans, I guess is kind of what I'm saying, to see how that's impacting rest or how that could impact performance, as whatever's going on there. That's again way over my head, but that's probably what I would say is, okay, what's going on. So so that this is happening. It all has to start with, eyes, perceive or seeing the light, and then transitioning those signals into the brain, and then brain processes it, sends the, signals out that it needs to. So then what's going on now, you've established what's going on here.
Right.
So that's kind of where I guess it is, it goes on here, and that it results in improvements in the muscle tissue, or the muscular performance, let's say. But what's missing is the piece that's going on in the middle, in the brain, as to why that occurs outside of potential ambulation, or wakefulness, alertness, whatever it might be.
Right.
So that would be interesting, but I don't know how you would do that.
That one's a tougher one. You need some serious commitment and equipment there.
Oh man, for sure. But no, that was a good, that was interesting. I definitely something I have never looked at other than
Mhm.
some of the intermittent fasting stuff. So,
No,
uh,
it's a more of a niche area of the
yeah,
literature for sure. And I just kind of stumbled into it and found out that, oh, this is really cool. I like this.
yeah. I think it's important
Mhm.
though, just
Yeah,
because, or it's more applicable, I think, than maybe most people realize, or at least it might make more sense based on people's experience.
right. People can
And kind
actually
of,
use some of this and apply it to their lives with, especially when it comes to the athletes, when I talk about the training specificity and things like
yeah,
that, and just day to day individuals understanding that getting light is important for establishing your circadian rhythms and what type of light and things like that. So yeah,
well, I think you can validate a lot of people though. I think that's a good thing to,
of
or
course, yeah. People like validation, right?
yeah, what you can say, like, it can really tell people, I'm not performing well at this time. Why is that? Right,
Mhm.
type of thing. And maybe that's where their schedule fits it into, but it'd be like, well, this sucks. I hate it. I'm never performing with or really well. It's like, well,
Right.
you may not be performing well, not on your own accord. Maybe have you tried working out in the evening? Yeah, I like
Mhm.
working out in the evening. Yeah, you might have,
Might be
right?
an evening chronotype, and that's
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So I think you can validate a lot of people to help them kind of make better decisions that way,
Right.
as far as their training and other things. So I think it's at least or worth discussing and evaluating, right, to see what really going on there.
Mhm.
Because night and day is a really, I would say, is a pretty important part of the human experience,
Probably so.
right? So, but we've been going for a little bit, so I'll let you get out of here, you busy guy. Nobody knows what Garrett's doing next, so
It's up in the air, but I hope everybody enjoyed this one. I like talking about it, obviously.
for
So
sure, for sure.
thank you guys for listening. And like always, post any responses or future ideas you have in our comments on Instagram or Facebook or what have you. We love having different ideas coming in. So thanks for you guys for listening, and we'll catch everybody next time.